A lot of wall has been built. We don't talk about that, but we might as well start because it's being built right now, big sections of wall. And we will continue that. And one way or the other, it's going to get built.
That was President Trump during the contentious Oval Office meeting with Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. He's claiming the border wall that he promised during the campaign and for the first 2 years of his administration is being built. Now, this is not a new claim. Here's the president just a few months ago at a rally in June.
Well, it's happening. It's not build that wall anymore. It's continue building that wall because we're building.
Look at this. His supporters have even traded in those build the wall signs for finish the wall signs. So is it true? Has Congress approved funding for the border wall? Here are a few facts. The week President Trump signed a major funding bill in March, he tweeted, got $1.6 billion to start wall on southern border. He's referring to this section of that huge funding bill for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, procurement, construction, and improvements. Yes, nearly $1.6 billion, paying for 6 projects along the border. Not one of them is a border wall. Look, fencing, 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 planning and design, and technology. No mention of a border wall. In fact, there's no mention of that phrase anywhere in the law. I checked. And aside from 14 miles of secondary barrier near San Diego, which is still not a wall that the president promised, the rest is clearly fencing. Now, if you think we're just playing a game of semantics, consider this. The border wall prototypes in Southern California, remember those? Congress set aside $20 million to build these 8 samples. These were the finalists. One of them was presumably to become the great border wall that the president promised. He first toured them in March, right before he signed the funding bill into law. So which one is being built along the border? Not one of them. Because the same funding bill that allocated $1.6 billion that the president brags about also says that money can only be spent to build designs deployed the prior year. So nothing new. No new wall designs, not the concrete barrier candidate Trump promised, certainly not one of the prototypes the president had seen for the first time only days earlier. It would be illegal to do so. So bottom line here, as the president fights for billions of dollars to finish the concrete border wall he promised, remember that despite his claims, he hasn't received a dollar to start it. Let's bring in Joseph Borelli. He's Minority Whip of the New York City Council representing the 51st District. Joseph, welcome back.
Good morning, Victor.
So let's start here with the definition of wall and what the president promised. Here, let's watch first what the president said, what he defined the wall would be, what it would be made of. This was during the campaign.
It's going to be made of hardened concrete, and it's going to be made out of rebar and steel. It's not a fence, it's a wall. You just misreported it. We're going to build a wall.
And here's what the president tweeted out this week. I'm going to read it here. A design of our steel slat barrier, which is totally effective, while at the same time beautiful. That's a fence. Okay, so the definition has changed here. Has the president given up on his impenetrable concrete wall?
Well, it does have some very scary points there, as you can see.
Yes, the points are scary.
Look, I think if we're arguing at this point about the semantics of what we're going to call the wall, Republicans probably have already won. As you pointed out, a number of projects.
Won what?
You said won the battle for securing the border with some sort of a physical barrier. I mean, that's really the end game, and that's been the goal of the president the whole time. I mean, as you pointed out, there are 7 projects. I think 4 of them were just announced later in 2018 that have replaced about 70 miles of fencing along the southern border.
With more fencing.
With fencing and with some form of physical barrier. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? That's essentially what Senator Lankford just said, is that we're arguing over the semantics of what we're going to call some type of barrier that hopefully
Well, that was also the
funded.
president's argument. The president, that soundbite I just played from the start of his administration, said that this is not a fence, it's a wall, that it was misreported when someone said it was a fence. But let's move on from semantics here. And what we're seeing in this negotiation, do you believe that there is You know, there's $1.3 billion now on the table from Democrats. The president obviously wants $5 billion for border security. Do you believe that there is a $2 to $3 billion compromise that would satisfy the president and his supporters, his base, for whom he, changed his decision on signing that funding bill just a few days ago?
Well, remember, it's not just the president; it's also the Republican House members that put forward this $5 billion wall funding package. I think there is.
But they already supported the legislation without it, and so did the Senate. So this was something that after the president changed his mind, went back on his word that he sent the vice president to the Hill to confirm to Republican and Democratic legislators that he would sign the funding bill. He changed his mind. So will he accept $2 to $3 billion?
And yet here we are with 2 out of the 3 parties we need agreeing on essentially a $5 billion package for border wall funding. I think Chuck Schumer's
Yeah, but you had 2 out of the 3 without it. Right?
Yeah,
the Republicans only changed because the president said he wouldn't sign it. Come on.
I think Republicans changed because they saw this as really the last opportunity to get this done before the House switches.
They were fine with it, but they were fine with it, Joseph, before. I mean, they were going to get to February 8th with the legislation that they had already supported.
And Democrats were fine with border wall fencing as recently as 2013. Of course, the Secure Fence Act of 2006. You had some Democrats, Joe Donnelly, saying that he'd be fine with a $5,000 border wall allocation. You had Joe Manchin campaigning this year on border fencing, on border wall. I think his ad actually said, "I support the Trump border wall." I think this is more about Chuck Schumer squeezing his members, not giving Donald Trump a win in the 11th hour. And that's frankly where we are. We're here because it's a Chuck Schumer shutdown. Once again.
Well, the president said he'd be proud to accept the mantle of the shutdown. How now does this 11 days later become the Chuck Schumer shutdown?
Well, that was before Nancy Pelosi put the gauntlet down and said, "You don't have the votes in the House." That was clearly a miscalculation on her part. She went out there, she challenged the president, she said do it. He went out there and he got it done. Now, again, we're sitting here with 2 out of 3 parties agreeing on this $5 billion number. I think you're right, though. I think there is room for compromise. But as Senator Lankford said in the last segment, I think we're talking about what we're going to put towards specific wall funding versus what we're going to put towards other measures at the border.
Well, they still have to decide what the allocations will be. I mean, that's the important element. There may be no allocation toward a wall funding, as there wasn't in the 2018 bill, although the president has said several times that he's gotten $1.6 billion for a wall. Let me play a soundbite here from you. It's from a few years ago from a really prominent real estate developer. He wasn't in government then. We now know that he later got into government, about a shutdown and who historically would be blamed. Quite prescient. Let's listen to this real estate developer.
They talk about the government shutdown. They're going to be talking about the President of the United States. Who was the president at that time? Mm-hmm. They're not going to be talking who the head of the House was, the head of the Senate, who's running things in Washington. They're going to be discussing one person. So I really think the pressure is on the president.
Seems like your characterization of a Schumer shutdown argues with the president's point there.
Look, of course the president is going to be partially responsible for any shutdown. But remember, this is the same argument we were having back in January of 2018, earlier this year, and that clearly was the Chuck Schumer shutdown. Now, again, we're at the same precipice where we have a majority of the Senate, we have the House who has already voted on this, and we have the White House all swimming in the same direction. But we need Democrats, most of whom already voted for some version of border fencing or wall.
All of this would seem to, I guess, stick if the president hadn't come out and said, "I will take the blame. I will not blame you," when sitting across from Chuck Schumer. He was proud to take up the mantle of shutting down the government for border security. But now you and he say that this is a Democratic shutdown. Let me ask one more thing. I know I'm getting a wrap here, but I got to ask this. And I don't offer this as a zinger or to be flippant or to be pithy here. But the president's promise was that Mexico was going to pay for this wall, 18 to 21 to 25 billion, depending upon whose estimate you believe. Why is he now handing this bill off to the American people? I mean, should his base accept that renege?
Look, I think his base is very happy with him with the deal we just struck with Mexico and Canada. I think I would love to see Mexico pay for the wall. I think that's not a reality. But I'll just defer to Joe Manchin, a Democrat's advertisement during this year's campaign. He said he'd be happy to pay for this wall. So I'll stick with Joe Manchin on this one.
Joseph Borrelli. I think the people watching this segment remember the campaign, remember who's going to pay for the wall, and thousands of people would shout Mexico, and the president would reaffirm that. and now he's asking the American people to pay for it. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.